Now, of course, I didn't have a favorite professor in seminary. At some point, you grow out of that. But if I did, I would admit that she was not a Unitarian Universalist. And she was a very strong person who had a knack for difficult questions. So one time in class, she said something that has stuck with me. Now, you say you don't have a unified theology, but I think y'all do. I think you just haven't figured it out yet. A unified theology? On the face of it, of course we don't. I'm looking out at the room and I'm looking at atheists and pagans and Christians and Buddhists and seekers and wanderers, and the only answer I can say is pluralism is not a unified theology. It's a description, not a prescription. Now, maybe I'm being pedantic. Maybe my challenge is the word theology, because, of course, if we take it literally, it just means the study of God. And that can't hold when we have in the room people who believe in no God or one God or many gods or I'm not sure about God. But if, as Unitarian Universalists like to do, we can become elastic with the word and say that theology is just a way of orienting yourself to the world, of making meaning in this world, a framework for your ethics and purpose. Well, okay, maybe she's right. Maybe we can find some center that holds. Now, any observer of our tradition would say, well, that's a pretty obvious one. Love. Love is what holds Unitarian Universalism together. That's our shared meaning, making, and purpose. And a smarter minister would say, that's the right answer. Amen. Please join me in the closing hymn. But I'm not that smart. I want to suggest something else, because love is one of those words that may be too elastic. It describes your feeling for Cheetos and your spouse. It's too big a word. I want to suggest the phrase active hope. Active Hope is the title of a book written by Joanna Macy and Chris Johnstone. And when I read it in seminary, I thought, now this may be a Unitarian Universalist theology. Here is how Macy and Johnstone introduce the idea of active hope. Okay, first we start from where we are by taking in a clear view of reality, acknowledging what we see and how we feel. Second, we identify what we hope for in terms of the direction we'd like to see things move in or the values we'd like to see expressed. And third, we take steps to move ourselves or our situation in that direction. It's such a simple, elegant model. Let me look at the world honestly and bravely. Then let me share my hope for where we could go from there. And then let's take some steps to get there. It's easy to implement. Here's our world. Iowa's waterways are riddled with nitrates. I would like drinkable water. Let's take steps in that direction. Here is our world. Our national leaders are actively promoting xenophobia and racism. I'd like to affirm the worth and dignity of every person. Let's take steps in that direction. So as a way of finding your purpose in life, it's an active, it's an engaged stance with the world. Let us take steps to move in this direction. And as a way of meaning making, it's foundationally hopeful. It's worth it for us to do something. It's possible. Now, possible is different than likely. Notice that Macy and Johnstone aren't talking about waiting until you get calculated odds of success. They're not talking about optimism, the belief that surely we'll get what we want. They're talking about hope, about setting off on the adventure even when the odds are against you. As I belabored The Lord of the Rings 2 weeks ago, Frodo doesn't set off to Mordor with a good chance of success. He does it because it's the right intention. Frodo has hope, not optimism. And poor Gandalf the Wizard has to remind people over and over that their present horrible moment is not the end of their journey. As Macy and Johnstone put it, since active hope doesn't require our optimism, we can apply it even in areas where we feel hopeless. The guiding impetus is intention. We choose what we aim to bring about, act for, or express. Rather than weighing our chances and proceeding only when we feel hopeful, we focus on our intention and let it be our guide. And that's where active hope starts to sound like theology to me, because it moves into a kind of faith, a kind of purpose. And it's easy to see it in our world. I am going to fight for the rights of my fellow siblings on Earth. I'm going to fight for the rights of my fellow siblings in Des Moines, even when those in power are calling Latin American siblings aliens, even when those in power are calling Somali Americans garbage, even when those in power are passing immoral legislation against trans siblings. We speak up not because we already have the votes lined up, but because we have calculated the chance of winning. We speak up because we are focusing on our intention, the thriving of all people. And we just let that be our guide. It matters what kind of story we think we are in. Macy and Johnstone name 3 ways that people see themselves in the story of our time. On this end of the spectrum is the great unraveling. Everything is falling apart. We're doomed. Right here is business as usual. Everything is happening as it normally does, as it should. Keep it rolling. And over here is the great turning. A better way is possible, indeed has begun. Take a minute to consider which story you think you're in. Is everything falling apart in our world? Are we operating as we should? Or are we in the emerging stages of co-creating a better, more sustainable, more loving world? Well, if we are to follow the steps of active hope, step 1 is to look at the world honestly. It's not great. It's not great. I have 1 paragraph, it could have been 10. If we set our blinders down here and see the suffering, it's unbearable. Today, more than 1 in 8 Americans are not sure where their next meal is going to come from. America remains the global leader in total prison population and, of course, incarceration rate per capita. We Americans are 1/25th of this earth and 1/6 of its climate change emissions. I find when I read the news every morning, it is a sort of ritual of despair. What fresh hell have we created for ourselves today? Are we still murdering people in the Caribbean? Is there another mass shooting? How could we say there's hope? How dare we say there's hope? Where could we possibly find the sun in so much darkness? Macy and Johnstone say this: when people first become aware of the extent of the unraveling, it comes as quite a shock. The mainstream mode has been to avoid looking at those issues if they're too disturbing. So when we fully open our eyes to the horror, we can feel unprepared, overwhelmed, and defeated. Flip-flopping between these different stories as though caught in a double reality, living with these 2 opposing versions of how things are going, presents us with an agonizing dilemma. To face the mess that we're in is scary and depressing, yet to turn away and not face it can leave us feeling that we're living a lie, being complicit with a social order that is actively destroying the world. So when we look at the worst, we may also experience a collapse in our belief that we can make any difference, but when we avoid looking, we don't see the need to even try. End quote. And boy, does that dance sound familiar. If you open your eyes and ears and embrace the suffering of this world, it's too much. But when we close them off and focus on our own busy project for the day, the awareness of the mess lingers in the back of our minds. What shall I do? When we were talking in the Celebrant team a while ago about hope, there's a line that grabbed me. Be careful what you teach your children. We were thinking about the social aspects of hope, about how hope and despair work in communities. And that line arose. Be careful what you teach your children. As the conversation flowed, and as Elijah just beautifully shared in his reflection, hope and despair both have a kind of social contagion. If you walk into a room and everyone in that room is predicting doom and gloom, you will pick that energy up. If you participate in an event that promotes hope for a better way forward, you'll pick that up. Whichever framework you're talking about around the kitchen table, your kids will assuredly pick up. Careful what you teach them. Because as much as we want to frame our conversation about hope as something that goes on inside our own hearts and minds, the mental health counseling model, right? We are social beings. And the good news is that we find hope with one another. We find hope when you're at a concert and the music from the choir or the orchestra just sweeps you into some transcendent state. You find hope when you're outdoors with other people, able to appreciate the beauty of this world. When we're working across generations and we're working with our youth and seeing the possibility for the world that they are building. When we gather in these services or in our small groups at church, we're inspiring one another to keep going with the good work. We may, in fact, be in the early stages of the great turning. The sun may indeed start shining longer and brighter. Because this is not the end of the story. Now, if you've ever heard me preach, you've probably heard me give this litany, and I will give it over and over until you have it memorized. 170 years ago, this was a nation where some people could own some people. And there were abolitionists fighting to change this. It was an enormously uphill battle with no realistic plan of success. The topic of abolition divided Unitarian church communities. It was a dangerous conversation at extended family gatherings. But abolitionists were willing to look at the world honestly, then share their hope for the liberation of people, and then take steps to get there. 110 years ago, we lived in a nation where women could not vote. It was a very contentious issue that had no reasonable plan for success. It divided Unitarian church communities, so I'm proud to say First Unitarian Des Moines was a major part of our suffrage movement in our city. It was the kind of conversation that you didn't bring up at extended family gatherings, but suffragists were willing to look at the world honestly, share their hope for the liberation of women, and then take steps to get there. Most people in this room will know and will remember in their own bodies and minds that 30 years ago, same-gendered couples could not get married. It was a contentious issue that had no realistic plan of success. It divided some Unitarian communities. It was certainly dangerous at extended family gatherings. But queer activists looked at the world honestly, shared their hope for the liberation of the LGBTQ community, and then took steps to get there. As Macy and Johnston note, yes, the Great Unraveling builds a momentum, increased climate destruction, increased carcerations, increased war. We feel like we're in it right now. But the Great Turning also builds a momentum of the increased flourishing of people, of peace, of justice, of democracy, of a sustainable planet. They put it this way: when their time comes, ideas and behaviors become contagious. The more people pass on inspiring perspectives, the more these perspectives catch on. At a certain point, the balance tips and we reach critical mass. Viewpoints and practices that were once on the margins, like abolition or suffrage, become the new mainstream. If you ask me, what is my purpose here as a Unitarian Universalist minister? What is our purpose as a congregation? It's that, to stand in the space between what is and what could be and take steps to get there. So be careful what we teach our children, because hope and despair are both contagious. Shall we teach them the great unraveling, the sun is gone forever? Shall we teach them the great turning, the sun may yet rise again? This is the heart of active hope, and as a meaning-making, purpose-oriented theology, I'd put it in the running for a UU theology. As Andrea shared, there is no darker weekend in the calendar than this one. This is as dark as it gets. But it would be silly to say, and I guess that's how it's always going to be. I mean, the rhythm of being alive in this world for a couple of years teaches you, of course the sun's going to come back. It doesn't promise it's coming back next week. It doesn't say that winter will be gentle or sunny or easy. But if you understand like the basics of planetary rotation and orbit, you understand that sometime between now and July, we'll stop complaining about cold and dark, and we'll start complaining about hot and bright. We are good Midwesterners. Now, the truth is, I don't know that Unitarian Universalism would ever want a unified theology. And that's really the only answer I could give to my favorite professor. Love was the clearest and best answer that the rest of the class gave her in that moment. Oh, professor, we believe in love. We believe in loving everyone, in siding with love. But we knew that wasn't the answer that people expect from theology. Why are we here? How was the universe created? What happens when we die? All of that. And to be fair, Active Hope does not answer any of those questions either. For those kinds of wonderings, I'm grateful to journey with you as you find your ethical and spiritual path. But I do think Active Hope answers the questions that drive most of us most days. How shall I live in this world today? What is my purpose? What do I want to teach the next generation? May we support and inspire one another to see the world bravely as it is, to share our hopes for what could be, and to take steps in that direction. And yes, may we do all of that with love at the center. Amen.